The Minnesota Wild have a new coach, but what impact is it having on the team? Plus, the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Toronto Maple Leafs are searching for consistency. Can they find it? We've got all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face and voice to Locked On NHL viewers and listeners, the host of Locked On Wild, Seth Toupal, and certainly not a dull week for the Minnesota Wild, Seth, a coaching change. Let's start with this. Why was the coaching change necessary? What was going wrong most, I guess, because I know there were a lot of things, but what was the biggest issue under the old regime and why did the change have to be made?
You know, Gil, the thing I think that was most interesting about making this move is just how candid Bill Guerin was in that everything that Dean Evason and his staff were trying just seemed to not be working. And, you know, Dean was his guy. And so this was obviously a very tough decision for him to make. He wanted to give leeway to try to get everything figured out, but the team, the coaching staff, you know, was hard on players. That didn't work. They were supportive of players and trying to kind of get them through this. That didn't work. And so Guerin just kind of got this sense that no matter what they tried, it just wasn't working. And so he decided to make the move and bring in John Hynes. And I mean, you go from a team that was just really tough to watch early on in the season to now these last two games have been great. It's been a lot of fun to watch this team over the last two games.
And how is Hynes' approach different than Evason's?
You know, it's funny because he hasn't changed a ton and it's still the same group of players. So a lot of people, even myself, just kind of watching this unfold are like, what's going on here? Because it's just the same mix, but I think it's interesting because we have seen the kind of word that is used most commonly go from grit from Dean Evason to where you're playing more of a physical style, trying to kind of wear down your opponents. The word with John Hynes has been speed, and he wants not only foot speed and quickness with the puck, getting the puck out of the defensive zone and pushing it back on the attack, but also in decision-making. We've seen this team throughout the course of the season so far. Just seems like it takes a long time sometimes to make decisions on where to go with the puck. So he has been trying to get kind of that ingrained of, hey, let's be quick and decisive with what we're doing out there. And so I think that's the biggest change. And he has gone from, I think, a mentality of, you know, we're going to hunker down in the defensive zone and just really try to prevent teams from scoring to let's take pressure off the defense and the goalies by just continuing to push the puck and trying to set up camp in the offensive zone. And so it hasn't been huge changes, but I think just the mindset that this team is going with now has been the thing that's led to these last two games being so good.
One other thing that's been better in the first two games under the new coaching staff is the penalty kill. They're still ranked dead last in the NHL, but what have you seen change as far as the approach to the penalty kill, and why is it better now than it was before the coaching change?
I think the big thing that affects the penalty kill the most is just the commitment level by the team now, and we've heard various players talk about how much of a wake-up call this was for them. I think you get a little comfortable and the season's rolling along, and all of a sudden things just get completely out of control. A coaching change just jolts everybody up, but we're seeing guys, lay out to block shots on the penalty kill, and it seems as though where the entire unit was trying to attack the puck previously, we're seeing a little bit more of, you've got one or two guys that are going out to try to disrupt instead of the whole thing. So you've got a couple of guys that are still staying back in front of the net. And, the biggest thing is that we're starting to see some saves from Filip Gustavsson and Marc-Andre Fleury too, because you can play as great of a penalty kill as you want. If the goalie doesn't make the saves on the back end, it's still going to look like a bad penalty kill. So the last two games, it's been great. But I think the biggest thing is just that you see guys really committed to trying to turn this around, which has led to just so many guys looking so much better over these last two games.
You talked about Gustafsson and Fleury, and their numbers, ironically, are almost identical. I mean, they have the same goals against average, save percentage is fairly close. Can they get their games back? I mean, how much of the problem was what was going on in front of them, and how much of the problem was them?
I think it's an equal opportunity blame to be spread around, because the thing with these Wild goalies last year is they were making a ton of saves, a ton of really, really tricky saves. And so you're stopping a lot of those, goals that your average goalie would not have any opportunity to make saves on. And then they would let in maybe one goal where you look back and you're like, that's one you should probably have. This year it's shifted higher to, say, 1 or 2 goals per game where you're like, you got to make that save. But now I think the biggest thing with Filip Gustavsson, who has gotten both starts since Hynes took over, is the confidence. I mean, I was shocked in just one of his interviews that he did after the, I think, the St. Louis Blues game. He said he didn't even like the taste of ice cream anymore. He was just not having any fun out there. And so goalies are driven by confidence, and the fact that he's been able to get it back has really helped Gustafsson be able to dig out of some struggles early on.
So, a lot of the time when teams make a coaching change, you get this short-term gain where, okay, it's a wake-up call, as you alluded to earlier, or, hey, things are going to be different. I have a chance to prove what I can do to the new coaching staff. But then after a week or two, it goes back to normal. What do the Wild have to do to prevent going back to the way they were playing before once the shock of this change wears off?
Well, I think they just need to keep that same battle level on a game-in, game-out basis. There just were so many games so far this season before John Hynes took over where it just looked like the team was checked out. And you can't have that. You're not going to win every game, but if you give that full battle level and that full commitment to all the things that you need to do, the things nobody likes, because blocking a shot isn't fun. You feel it after the game, and you don't want to do that. So I don't envy players for having to do that multiple times a game, but those are the things that win you games. And so the fact that they have been better at that, I think the other thing that's been interesting too, Gil, is that there just doesn't seem to be any sort of allegiances with the coaching staff and this group of players right now. So everybody is kind of throwing everything they have out there, because you want to be that go-to guy when Hynes is looking for somebody to come in late in the game and give you a spark. So far, it has been the fourth line. Connor Dewar, Brandon Duhaime, those guys seem to have been the ones that Hynes liked the most. And in the game against Nashville, they got put on the top power play late in the game. Granted, it was 6-1, so at that point, you're trying to not get anybody too exhausted, but those guys' minutes have gone up about 4 or 5 minutes a night since Hynes took over. I don't think it's any coincidence, because those are two of the guys that work the hardest on this team, and that's the thing you want first and foremost as a head coach. So if we get some of those top-level guys bringing that consistently as well, this team has the pieces to be able to get back into the postseason picture for sure.
All right, Seth, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Make sure to follow along with Locked on Wilds on YouTube, on any of your favorite podcast platforms, and it's Locked on Wild on all social media accounts as well. Nice and easy there. And then you can follow me on X as well at Seth TOUPS. A lot of different sports takes there, but that's usually where I do most of the posting during games is from my personal account. And then we have all those wide array of elite social graphics after games that you can find on Locked on Wild as well.
All right, Seth, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. A new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Your favorite player could score 50 goals. Your favorite team could hoist the Stanley Cup. And you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid, Ovechkin, Crosby, or McKinnon will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, hockey fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Lightning, Adam Denker. And Adam, sorry to have you on now when this team is struggling the way they are. When was the last time the Lightning had a 4-game losing streak?
Not too long ago. I mean, we here on Locked On Lightning try to have a little bit of a short memory when it comes to such things. So, it kind of seems like everything is exponentially worse with the Lightning every time they lose a game, because when they lose, Gil, they lose in spectacular fashion, as was seen today against Dallas. And it's very frustrating, and we'll get into it, I'm sure. But this team has just been very inconsistent, and I think that's the only thing we could say is that they are consistent at being inconsistent, and it was prevalent in today's blowout loss on the road.
One of the things that has been plaguing them is slow starts. You mentioned that when we were speaking before we started recording. Why do you think this team is having trouble being ready for the opening faceoff?
I just think it comes back to being prepared. And a lot of Lightning fans at the beginning of the season and even over the last year, have kind of looked at the players and saying, you guys got to get out to an early start. They got to be ready. They got to make the right decisions right off the bat and, not wake up in spectacular fashion in the second period. But now it seems as though over the past week that now the fan base, including yours truly, is starting to look now at the coaching staff. And that's really what I think is going to be talked about most in the upcoming weeks. If this continues, is this team doing the right things between matchups? Are they being prepared the right way in practice? Are they doing things game to game that they could carry over? If they're being successful, is that something that is a long-term thing that they could carry over into the next game? That was a big talking point after they blew the doors off of Carolina, and you didn't really see it. And that's the big thing for them, is that doing the little things, carrying it over game to game. And if they could do that, then, they could be prepared. They could do the right things in practice, but we haven't seen that consistently this season.
One problem they have had all year, they're near the bottom of the league in goals allowed right now. Now, obviously, getting Vasilevskiy back should help in that area, but is the defense that's been in front of these goalies been a problem, and has that been fixed after giving up 8 goals to Dallas on Saturday?
Oh, it's been a huge problem all year. And, the big talking point with that was, who do we blame? Is it more so the defensive core, because yeah, there's been some games where the Lightning have been averaging giving up about 3 to 4, even sometimes 5. And, Andrei Vasilevskiy not beginning the season with this team, that was obviously one of the big variables with that. But at the same time, Jonas Johansson did a phenomenal job, all things considered, being the starting goaltender for this team. But yeah, the defensive core, what really their issue has just been being out of position, standing still, just not being able to follow the puck and close down on defenders. Today in this game against Dallas, Dallas was able to do whatever they wanted. I tweeted during the game that Dallas could set up a cot and take a nap in front of Vasilevskiy, and Tampa wouldn't be able to do anything about it. And really, that's not far from the truth. And, really, we're going to have to see in the next couple of weeks what this team could do to kind of reverse that fortune, reverse that play, because it's not, as I said on my show, it doesn't get any better, Gil. This team faced off against Colorado this previous week. They faced off against Pittsburgh. Well, guess what? After today's loss to Dallas, they face off against Dallas back home on Monday. And then they got Pittsburgh and a bunch of other tough matchups. So really, until we see otherwise, in my opinion, they haven't fixed the thing.
Is a trade a possibility as far as trying to get a fix on this defense? Or do you think they just look at the players they have and need them to play better?
I think Tampa is just looking within. I think that they're looking at what they have at the NHL level. I think pretty soon, if it doesn't get better, they might be looking in even in their minor league system up in Syracuse. But the Lightning aren't exactly in a situation right now where they can make trades without giving up something very significant. Now, before we hit the record button, I kind of spoke about, Steven Stamkos with the contract situation. That idea was actually kind of floated today on Twitter by a couple of my listeners. Do the Lightning at some point, are they sellers? Are they buyers? And if they're kind of in between, is Stamkos a trade chip? Now that opens up a whole can of worms with the organization if that ends up being a legitimate conversation. But as for defensive, changes, really, it's just about maybe switching up the lines. And that's really unfortunate because really it's everybody top to bottom. So, how many different combinations could you try to change things that's really going to make a significant difference?
Got to ask you about Nikita Kucherov. I mean, just off the charts, great start to this season. What is he doing so well, and can he keep up this amazing pace?
What Kuch has been doing so well this year, really, he's been playing more aggressive. He's been playing, it's kind of shades of 2019 with Kuch. I'm not expecting a 120 plus point season, but I'm not going to rule that out at the certain pace that he's at right now. But at the same time, it's his aggressiveness. He's playing with tons of confidence. And on the other hand, he kind of has to, with the way that this Lightning team has struggled to start the season offensively, and at times have looked really flat throughout the course of games. He's really been the only bright spot. He's been really the only guy that's been able to get things going. And we might see that might be a result of nobody else being able to produce around him as to why he's gotten off to such a hot start. But I mean, individual performance alone, I think it's phenomenal for him. I think it's, when you see what he could do as long as he stays healthy, he's definitely one of the top players in the league.
No question about it. So here we are. We're past the quarter point of this season. Do you think the Bolts can contend for the playoffs in this division, or do you think this team is in some serious trouble right now, or both?
I think that it changes week to week with this team, actually matchup to matchup. If you would have asked me a week ago after the win against Carolina, Andrei Vasilevskiy's debut, I would have told you this team is definitely going to make the playoffs, definitely make a play for possibly. I think I actually came out on the episode afterwards saying that they were going to challenge for the second spot in the division. That just shows you how high and how low this team could really get from matchup to matchup. But right now, and this might just be recency bias that coming off giving up 8 goals to Dallas, I would say that the chances of them making the playoffs right now are very slim. If they manage to kind of wrangle it together and get to playing well, a wild card spot isn't exactly out of, the realistic possibilities. But at the same time, you know as well as I do, there's two divisions in the East. The Atlantic Division is tough, but the teams coming out of the Metropolitan are just as tough, if not more, of a pain in the butt to contend against. So the Lightning have their work cut out for them. And really, the only people that could dictate their future is them. So, we're just going to have to sit and wait. But right now, if I had to pick, I would say it would be no playoffs for the Lightning later on in 2024.
Well, we're going to see. It's a veteran team. They've been there before. Let's see if they can get back on track. Adam, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
We're available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. You could catch us on our channel on YouTube as well. Go ahead and subscribe to that to keep up with the emotional roller coaster that I will be on for the rest of the season. And you could follow us on social media at LO_Lightning, as well as Lockdown_Lightning on Instagram. So go ahead and do that.
All right, Adam, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could do the same thing with your business team? Well, if you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like instant match assessments and virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you need to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost for application processing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Leafs, David Morassutti. And David, such a up and down season for the Toronto Maple Leafs, still a team struggling to find consistency. What do you think is the big missing ingredient on this team right now that's preventing them from finding a consistent groove?
I think it's just the star players need to have more consistent outings, right? They haven't had all their best players come through at the same time. To start the year, William Nylander is the guy, right? Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner were kind of, playing well, but not playing to their potential. And, then they make this switch around to try to get more cohesiveness throughout the lineup. I think that's really it too. Is like there's not that cohesiveness from top to bottom with this group. And then obviously the blue line, right? There's overcompensating at times for the blue line and how they've played and, trying to figure out who the goaltending is going to be. There's just so many. Sheldon Keefe is trying so many different things to see what's going to work. And because there hasn't really been that consistency, it's really plagued them, and until they kind of keep things on a consistent basis, whether it's the lines on a consistent basis, the goaltending rotation on a consistent basis, and also getting some guys back from injuries, this is the sort of thing that you're going to be dealing with the Leafs. And it's not something that, is uncommon. Like last year, the Leafs had their struggles earlier in the year, and eventually they found a rhythm and got better. This time around, I just think that you look at the way that the Atlantic is this year, there's a lot more competition, a lot more teams really pushing this year rather than last year when it was like three teams and then, three teams just kind of waiting for the playoffs because everything's been set in stone so early.
Yeah, no, definitely a big difference. Talk to me about the goaltending because Ilya Samsonov has not statistically looked great. Joseph Woll kind of taking over more as the starter. What's going on in net and how much of it is the goaltending and how much of it is the defense the team is playing in front of those goalies?
Yeah, I think to start the year, Ilya Samsonov had his struggles, and large in part because the defense in front of him wasn't good, right? They're consistently allowing 4 or more goals at home, which, that just can't happen, right? And so eventually Joseph Woll came in. He looked really good, and then things kind of leveled off because he was kind of bailing out a defense that wasn't playing well. Now the defense has sort of improved a little bit. Things have kind of settled a bit. And Joseph Woll right now is running away, I think, with the job. Are they really ready right now to name Joseph Woll the number 1 goaltender? No, I don't think so. I think they still want Samsonov to battle for it. But for right now, because they've been going back and forth between the two, it's so hard as a goaltender to get a rhythm, to get yourself going. You still need to have a little bit of rotation. I get that Joseph Woll has never been a starter in the NHL. He really hasn't played a lot of hockey. Injuries have kind of been his issue, in through his development. This is now Joseph Woll's kind of first time really to show he's capable of being a starter. And I went into this year thinking there's a really good chance that he could come in and potentially win a job over Samsonov for 2 reasons. One, he signed past this year. Samsonov is a pending free agent. The Leafs are going to want to see what they have in Joseph Woll to see if they are comfortable giving him that job going forward. And he came into the playoffs last year when Samsonov got hurt, and he performed very well, right? So this is a player who not only has that future part, right, seen as a bit of the future guy, but also the performances have dictated he deserves more opportunity. And yeah, a bit of a rough one for him against Boston. I thought he played well enough to win, but there were some, minor blimps there, but he gave the Leafs a chance to win. He's been giving them a chance to win almost every single game he's been in. They've been rather close. So I think right now, Joseph Woll's the guy until, he's not. In my opinion, I think that's where they have to go.
You mentioned Samsonov's contract being up at the end of the year. Another player whose contract is up, William Nylander. Talk to me about his future with the team and where the team goes from here with him.
Yeah, it's a case of the classic Toronto where a player is doing so well, fans are worried about how the heck they're going to keep him. And not just keep him, but afford him. Because this team has gone into every single season with such a top-heavy lineup at forwards with Matthews and Marner and Tavares all making over $10 million. Yes, the cap is going up, but William Nylander is putting himself in that conversation of earning. Going into the season, nobody was talking about thinking the Leafs were going to pay Nylander over $10 million. Everyone was kind of saying maybe 10 is the max. He should be getting lower than that based on what he has shown. So the question the Leafs have right now is, can they get Nylander to buy in a little bit here? And I think that's kind of where, Brad Living says they're keeping things open, right? Nylander, I don't think he's too concerned about the contract, but I think the Leafs are concerned that you've now got a guy who is performing in a contract year and you want to pay him and he's deserving to get paid based on how he's played so far. You always get a little concerned if the play is going to dip back a little bit to what we've seen in the past few years and if that number is going to be a little bit too much for him. But, he's 27. This is when you pay these guys. If they can get him signed to a long-term deal, I think the Leafs will want to get it done. It's just now a matter of how do they get it all to work? How do you get the math to all work?
Going to be a big question, and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the season and maybe even into the off season. David, the team is struggling with its consistency, as we said. I know there were some rumors in the last week about a possible trade with Calgary that fell through. What moves, if any, do you think this team is going to make between now and the trade deadline?
They got to beef up that blue line. It was a concern going into this year. The only move they made was to go and get John Klingberg. He's now on the shelf. There's a talk about whether he's even going to come back this year based on it being a hip injury and if that's going to need an operation, because we know as soon as you have a hip operation, that likely ends your season. So that's the first domino that would have to be either fall or have to be figured out. And then you gain that cap space, but there aren't teams going out and saying, here's the top 4 guy ready for you, right? The Leafs tried to get the Zadorov trade done, but from what it sounds like, they want to do Zadorov and Chris Tanev. Chris Tanev, I think, being the bigger target for them because he is a true top 4 defenseman. That's exactly what they need. They need someone with reliability that's going to be able to take some pressure off of Morgan Rielly and TJ Brody. For me, seeing how this blue line has played with Giordano, Liljegren, and now Klingberg out, 3 regulars out of the lineup. Lagesson, Simon Benoit have played really well during this time. Connor Timmins is getting that everyday opportunity that he hadn't really gotten. But it's clear to me that this team does need that top 4 guy. And because then everyone, it gives you depth and other guys move down. So I think getting that top 4 defenseman is going to be so crucial for the Leafs. I think right now it's tough to say who that player is because the only name right now out there is Chris Tanev. There aren't many teams putting out defensemen in the open market because they want to wait until the prices go up close to the trade deadline. Unfortunately for the Leafs, they might not be able to wait that long. They might want to get a deal done now, and that's going to limit what they can bring back.
Is there a preference for a left or right-handed shot, or?
Well, I'd say the right side is the area that needs the most work because Klingberg was a righty, Liljegren was a righty. They're both out. Liljegren will come back eventually. There's no real date or timetable set up for when he's going to come back. He just started skating. It was an ankle injury. That's going to take some time to ramp back up. So I think right side is the preference, and that's what makes it tougher. There aren't many right defensemen right now out there. Jake McCabe actually had to be switched from the left side to the right side because they don't have many options. Connor Timmins is their only right shooting defenseman right now playing. So I think if there is a preference, it's a player that can play the right side.
All right, David, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find you on social media and where they could find the podcast?
Yeah, you can go and find the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Also on YouTube, Locked On Leafs. And you can follow me on X at @_Morassutti.
All right, David, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Gil.
All right, I want to thank my guests, Seth Toupal of Locked On Wild, Adam Denker of Locked On Lightning, and David Morassutti of Locked On Leafs for joining me today. And I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget, we are here every Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL. I also co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.